Welcome to today's episode of the SCP podcast. I am Dr. Ryan C. Warner, consulting psychologist and the advocacy domain leader for Division 13, the Society of Consulting Psychology. The purpose of this podcast is to bring light to the critical issues impacting consulting psychologists today and advocate for the role of psychological science in driving meaningful change across the organizations and systems that our members serve. In today's episode, we'll explore how consulting psychologists can close the gap between values and practice and better navigate resistance to boost effectiveness within the workplaces they serve. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. LaShawn Gooden. Dr. Gooden is a consultant psychologist, speaker, and the founder of LaShawn Gooden Consulting. Dr. Gooden, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so I know that you really focus on, alignment between people and performance within the workplace. And when
Mhm.
I learn more about, what you do, I think about in today's society, there's a lot of misalignment, right?
Mhm.
We're not going to get too much into it today, but everybody knows the rollback of DI, right? So you may go into organization's website, and in the past, they say we really value diversity, equity, inclusion. And fast forward now, those values have shifted.
Mhm.
We also may see, hey, let's look at the workplace. Today, 70%, according to the APA survey that came out maybe about a year ago, 70% of workers are burnt out in the stress
Mhm.
in their jobs.
Mhm.
However, when you go on the website of these various workplaces, hey, we value organizational well-being, and here's all the perks that we give our employees so that they can thrive, right? But there's so much misalignment that we see within these organizations in today's society. And I know that you focus on figuring out how can organizations become more aligned with their people and their values so they can boost their performance. So can you tell us a little bit more about like why is that important for us as consulting psychologists to be able to do this well and help leaders that we support be able to create that alignment within their organizations?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's so important for people performance and purpose to be aligned because as you mentioned, when people are not clear on what their purpose is at work, when they don't have clear instructions, when they're making up things, they don't perform well. The organizational tanks, people start to get burnt out, they start to get disgruntled, they start feeling frustrated. And so as consulting psychologists, what we can do is go into organizations and, take an assessment of does the organization's, mission statement, vision statement really align with what's actually happening? Because like you mentioned, it's great for us to say this on paper on our websites or whatever, but if it's not really showing up, it's going to show up in our employees and how, they work. So again, as a consultant, we can go in and really start to assess behaviors, looking at how leaders are leading, how teams are communicating. Is there dysfunction? Is there psychological safety so that the members can actually talk to their leadership if they're feeling unsafe? And so clarifying those values, right? Like, again, are you saying things and we don't really know what that means? And so as consultants, we go and do that and help, organizations and leadership understand that this isn't just something we're going to say, but we actually got to have this in the DNA of our culture so that not only can our, employees thrive, but ultimately our organization is successful.
Yeah, it's interesting with working with organizations myself. I see a lot of surface level initiatives try to take place.
Hmm.
And we feel that that's embedded within our DNA as an organization. But when you dive a little bit deeper, when you look into their policies, practices, and procedures, then it seems misaligned, right? So I'm curious, what are some signs that organizations may not be aligned with, how they're actually taking care of their people and the values, that they show and display? Like, how would we even be able to identify that as consulting psychologists going into these organizations to support them?
Absolutely. I think one of the ways that we can understand if there's true alignment, again, like I was mentioning, is this assessment. And I think people are the heart of an organization. So being able to really sit down and, have these discussions or interviews where this open space where people feel safe to share with us as consultants what's actually going on in the organizations. A lot of times, I think what we will see if there's not alignment in those conversations is that, employees will tend to talk about how they're emotionally exhausted or they don't really know what they're doing. They're just going through the motions. I'm just here for my paycheck, that type of thing. Or, they're not clear. So, team A is going this way and team B is going this way, and we just are going in different directions. And so I think as the consultant, being able again to come in and ask the hard questions like, it seems to be some miscommunication between team A and team B. Like, what do you think is happening? Or, I know on your organization's website, they say they promote DEI, but how do you feel DEI is showing up? Is it showing up, right? Those are valuable questions that I think that psychologists have the benefit of knowing how to ask those open-ended questions that get to kind of the heart of what people are actually experiencing.
Yeah, I think that's great. And oftentimes, our job is to figure out how to navigate that resistance. Because
Hmm.
naturally, right, when we're going into organizations, there's
Hmm.
going to be pushback, right?
Right. Hmm.
And I'm curious, how do you navigate resistance? And maybe could you give an example of any resistance that you've seen in the work that you do? Because I know a lot of us can probably relate to that, getting that pushback, whether that be in executive coaching or strategic planning, or even, trying to engage in various training facilitation type initiatives.
Absolutely. From my perspective, resistance is really a part of transformation. So it's us as a consulting psychologist are coming in and we're noticing resistance. Like that's part of, change. That's part of understanding like what's happening and how do we get to where we want to be. And
Mm.
understanding that resistance is often like a sign of fear, maybe fatigue, maybe feeling like there's unmet needs.
Yeah,
And so, rather than just, pushing through it or feeling kind of frustrated that we're being met with resistance or there's maybe resistance in an organization to kind of share. I think really trying to understand like what's underneath that resistance.
right.
What are people trying to protect? What are they afraid they'll lose by sharing? What haven't we really talked about? And so I think for us as consulting psychologists, I think just really normalizing this resistance and the discomfort that people will experience as they are shifting and trying to grow um, and making sure that what they say on paper is aligned with how they're actually showing up, right? That's congruent.
Right.
Um, so I think I would just say like using some of the values-based approaches like ACT to understand and make sure those things are, connected, making sure we understand what the values are and their congruence. I think some of that is how we shift and we meet resistance and understanding that we can help organizations foster like psychological safety and build relational trust so that people can move through the resistance that they're facing.
Yeah, that is so powerful, right? So instead of trying to go directly to, hey, figure out how can I change the organization, we need to sit back and identify first what's causing the resistance, what resistance, is coming to the surface.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we're good at helping others do that, but within ourselves, it's
Yeah.
hard to look intrapersonal. It's hard to identify what's that resistance within myself that's maybe blocking my growth and my progress within my career.
Hmm.
One thing I often see is a lot of like clinical psychologists trying to transition and break into the field of consulting psychology.
Hmm.
And ultimately, then I've noticed, just when engaging a lot of that coaching is that interpersonal resistance. I want to start my own business, right? But interpersonally, right, there's a lot of self-limiting beliefs.
Right.
Interpersonally, maybe there's not a lot of intrinsic motivation, right? So I'm curious, how do we look within as consultant psychologists to also navigate that, that misalignment?
Absolutely. I think it takes intentionality. I think it takes slowing down. Like you said, so often we're able to look at organizations or things outside of us and say, hey, what do they need or what can be different? But I think for us as psychologists, we got to slow down and really start to look internally and try to figure out, what's missing, right? Why am I doing what I want to do? Like you talked about a lot of, clinical psychologists shifting to consulting psychologists. And I'm glad you brought that up because that's a little bit of my story and, some of that self-doubt and belief. But I really have to slow down one and say, like, why do I want to be a consultant? Identifying my why. And remembering that because I think that's going to anchor you. It's easier to do something once you really have a why that you're passionate about, and then breaking things up into smaller steps, right? Like you're not going to be the consulting psychologist overnight, right? But how can you, get your name out there? How can you move forward? And then using your social support, people that you can depend on, trust, ask questions, coaches if you need, that type of thing, I think is how you can navigate that resistance intrapersonally and really try to get to where you want to go or be where you want to be.
Yeah, so this is such an important topic, and hopefully you're able to submit a proposal. And this is a quick plug. SCP, our proposal deadline is coming up, so ensure that you're submitting that proposal to talk more about, the people in performance and how, we can help organizations stay aligned. And hopefully, yeah, you're able to present that in Las Vegas coming up in February 2026. So that would be
Mm,
great to just learn more about this topic. And yeah. I know that a lot of individuals listening to this right now are going to benefit, from what was discussed.
absolutely.
Yeah, so thanks for coming on the SCP podcast. Where can listeners find you? How can they reach out?
Absolutely. Listeners, excuse me, can find me on my LinkedIn at LaShawn Gooden. Also my website, www.lashawngoodenconsultant.com to learn a little bit more about me.
All right, great. So stay tuned until next time. This is Dr. Ryan Warner signing off for today. Thanks so much.